Hey guys, Freddy with Poor Man Mods here. I just got a bunch of goodies from TechnoToyTuning for my 2002 Lexus IS300. I like to call it my IS400 because it's one you Z-swapped, but TechnoToyTuning sent me a bunch of goodies that we're going to be installing today. So what we're going to be installing in this video is T3 sent me a pair of their rear toe links for the IS300, their rear traction links, front outer tie rods, and then front and rear adjustable sway bar end links. This stuff is going to be a good upgrade whether your car is stock or highly modified. This car already has all of the suspension bushings converted into polyurethane, so we're going to be eliminating bushings with these Heim joints, which is going to eliminate slop and deflection in your suspension and make it a lot more predictable and easier to maintain the alignment that you set. I added essentially these same components to my Mark III Super from TechnoToyTuning and didn't notice a huge increase in NVH, but it's really going to improve their durability, and these are going to last way longer than traditional bushings. There's really not much that can fail here. And what I really like about the hardware kit that they provide with these suspension arms is they include cam lockout bolts for this. So there's plates in this hardware kit that eliminate the factory cam bolts, which in certain situations, they can lose their alignment. These completely eliminate those bolts, which are expensive to replace if you need to replace them. They can get seized and be a pain in the butt, but they can also lose their adjustment over time. These completely eliminate that, which I really like, and then leave the alignment to the arms themselves, which I like. So I'm really excited about this. This is going to add reliability to the car and make the suspension even more predictable than it already is. I love the way this car handles, but this is going to make it even better. So I'm super excited about it. We're going to start in the rear of the car, so let's get to it. All right, we're going to start off by changing out these old, ugly toe links. Now, a couple years ago, I did replace all the control arm bushings on this car, so these bolts have been out before. But chances are, if these are original on your car, if you've got 150, 200,000 or more miles, these bolts might be seriously difficult to remove. Now, once you get this nut off for this, toe adjustment bolt here, the bolt should just slide right out. But if this has been in your car for 20 years and you live in the Rust Belt, this bolt could very well be seized in the sleeve with this bushing, and it could be very difficult to get out. If that happens, you pretty much have to take a Sawzall or a cutoff wheel and cut the bolt on each side to get the arm out. Our bolt shouldn't be stuck because a couple years ago I did put anti-seize on here. So theoretically, it should tap out. But in your case, if this is the first time you're ever doing this bolt, you might have a bit of a struggle here. Luckily for me, it's coming right out. Ran into the same problem on the other side. This little bracket here, the bolt hits. There's two bolts there that we have to remove. Once you get those two bolts out, there's one more. Way up there. That's the other end of the bracket. You should be able to just loosen that one, and then the whole bracket can pivot, and you should be able to get the bolt out. So we're going to try to loosen this one before we totally remove it. And of course, we've got to take off this little bracket for the ABS wire. With the two bottom bolts out and the top bolt loose, this bracket can pivot out of the way, and we can get that bolt out. And we should be able to push this bar a bit of an angle, get the bolt the rest of the way out, and finally, our toe link is out. One issue that I found that you can run into with bushings like these, that the rod ends that TechnoToyTuning provides can totally eliminate. Sometimes when you get these bushing kits, the bushing is slightly wider than the sleeve. When that happens, if you don't trim it down, if the bushing is wider than the sleeve, when you go to put the control arm into its home, into where you put the bolt through, when you go to tighten it down, it's getting clamped by the bushing, and not the sleeve, which can cause this to bind up and possibly not even move. It's supposed to clamp onto this sleeve so then that the bushing and the arm can freely rotate around the sleeve. Sometimes that doesn't happen. It can cause binding, and it can also cause a popping noise or a squeaking noise or various other kinds of noises. I have ran into that on this car, and I know that's an issue and I know I've heard of other people running into that issue as well. So when you run a setup like this with these rod ends and these machined pieces here, totally eliminates that possibility, and these are self-lubricating with Teflon inserts, so they're not going to squeak, they're not going to make any kind of noise, they're going to be more reliable than a setup like this, last a lot longer, and you're not going to hear them making annoying noises. Now, since I am not a professional alignment guy, what I'm going to do is just set this length to approximately the same length as this toe link. Then I'm going to get this car professionally aligned and tell them, you know, I do daily drive it, but it also is an autocross car. So I'm going to get these toe links and also the traction links just pretty close to the stock length, and then I'll let the alignment shop take care of the rest. But these are super easy to adjust. You just loosen these jam nuts here, and then turn it like this, and it extends and retracts. Super easy. So when this is installed in the car, it is very easy to adjust. You get a lot of fine tuning out of this. And another thing that I love about this setup, and they did a similar thing on the Mark III Supra suspension arms that they sent me. They come with these cam bolt eliminator plates. This is the factory cam bolt that adjusts toe in the back, and I'm not a fan of these. These can get seized in the sleeve here, like I mentioned before, and also you can lose your alignment over time if you hit a bump or whatever. So these are going to make things a lot simpler, cheaper to replace if you ever need to replace this bolt, and instead of having to adjust this for your alignment, which these aren't the most precise things in the world. This is much more precise, and it's going to be way easier to dial in the specs that you want. So I love these lockout plates, so we're going to go ahead and install this on the car with these lockout plates. The only issue that I've found with these arms or with the kits that they've sent me is they don't provide enough washers for my liking. So I have had to use some of my own washers, which isn't the end of the world. Not a deal breaker, but just something to point out. So let's go ahead and get this bad boy in the car. Such a satisfying fit. Zero tolerance fit. Very nice. As you can see, when you go to install these lockout plates, as you can see this hole here, it's not centered. It doesn't matter the orientation of where you put this circle, whether it's towards the top, bottom, as long as you make them the same on both sides. For me, I'm going to try to go with putting the circle towards the bottom. It's going to be pretty much impossible to see. Getting it on the back side here. Pretty much impossible to see, but I got the plate on the inside here with the hole towards the bottom. I'll get the nut on. And before we tighten that down, we'll get this end on. And they machined this to have a perfect tapered fit, just like the factory arm. Now we can go ahead and tighten down these bolts. Yeah, right about there seems good. And same thing for the bolt back here, 19 millimeter on both sides. And so what I was saying earlier about how the bushings can bind up on arms like this, the way these are rod ends with Teflon bushings inside,
You could tighten this bolt pretty much as tight as you could possibly make it, way over spec, and it's still gonna be able to rotate. It's not gonna bind up and make noise. That's one of the big benefits of these arms. And they're just a lot more durable, and they look a heck of a lot better. And they get rid of any slop. There's no rubber to be moving around. They make everything a lot more precise back here. They do include these little wire clamps to go around this arm here to resecure this ABS line, but I wouldn't recommend installing these until your alignment's finished because they are gonna have to rotate this. So just leave this loose for now, and then when your alignment's finished, you can secure it with the included bracket. Get this stock traction link out of here. Here comes the real dirty part. Dropping this thing, a bunch of gravel's probably gonna fall out. Lovely. Here's an example of where I think the bushing might be wider than the sleeve. Probably can't hear it, but right there, it's squeaking without even any tension on it. So when the bolt compresses on this, it's pressing on the bushing, which can bind up the entire thing, which isn't good, and this traction link is going to solve that problem. No more binding, no more squeak. Definitely, you could see there's a witness mark here of where it was compressing the bushing and this was squeezing out. So yeah, these TechnoToyTuning links are going to be quite the upgrade. Yeah, we'll need to spread it a bit. Oh yeah. Here's where I would like a washer. Ideally, you'd want a washer on both sides of here. But what I think is most important is having a washer on the side with the nut. So I am using my own washer here. And same thing here. I'd like there to be a washer here. We'll get our jam nuts snugged up here. Don't need to make these crazy tight since it will be getting aligned. But not by me. Let's get this old sway bar end link out of here. This puny, chintzy little thing. Okay, for this, you're gonna hope and pray that this is not your original end link. If it is, you might strip it and you might have to cut it out. Luckily, these are not the original. I've had these off before. It's got a new sway bar on it, so they shouldn't put up a fight. But if these are really old, but you need this 5mm Allen wrench in the middle to hold the stud so you can loosen the nut. But if these are pretty old, a lot of times they strip out and then you'll just have to cut it off, which is never fun. So let's hope that it breaks loose. And of course it did. But if this has 150, 200,000 miles on it, it might be a struggle for you. So just be cautious of that. Here's one thing that's going to make it a lot easier to get the new end link in. Loosen your lower shock bolt. You might also have to do this before removing the end link, but loosening this will free up the control arm, spreading it out a little bit, and hopefully this should fit down in there. But now you tell me, which one of these looks beefier? Like, this thing looks like it could just bend no problem at all. This is a lot stronger, fully adjustable, so you can add preload and adjust the height of the sway bar. Now, I don't know a whole lot about, that kind of suspension tuning, so I'm just gonna make this the stock length for now. Yeah, this was a bit of a struggle to get in there. Had to spread the control arm a little bit with a pry bar, even though I loosened this bolt. Got the bolt through, and here's where I'm going to add some of my own washers. Stick it through the end link. Have the provided spacer between the end link and the sway bar, and slide a washer on there, which I prefer, and then the provided nut. Then we can tighten this down. And then you need 2 13s to tighten the lower bolt. And now we can tighten these jam nuts here for the end link. It's very difficult to show on camera while I do it because it's in such a tight spot, but it is possible to get to that lower jam nut. You need a 14mm wrench on the bottom. Then I have an adjustable holding the middle adjuster of the end link, and then you can tighten that jam nut and do the same thing to the top one. Got these jam nuts tightened. Now we're finished for the rear, and we'll go ahead and work on the front. All right, we're at the front of the car now. We're gonna get off these old sway bar end links. These can be a bear to get off, especially if they're old. This one's looking pretty crusty. You have to get a 5mm Allen key in the middle here to hold this while you get this 14mm nut off. Quite often, if this is really tight, you're gonna strip this out, and it can be really difficult to remove, and you have to cut it off. I really don't like this style end link, so I'm glad we're replacing it with these TechnoToyTuning end links. What I'm gonna try to do first to make our life a little easier, I did preemptively soak this with some seafoam, but I'm gonna put an impact on here and see if I can get the nut off without using an Allen wrench first, see if I can just impact it off. So, no, it just spun. So what we're gonna do now is take our 14mm wrench, put it on here, then our 5mm Allen key. We're gonna put this ratchet. Now it can be pretty crusty, so you have to. Tap it in there. You want this to have as much bite as possible. Oh boy. Let's, you know what? Before I strip it, since I'm replacing this, I'm gonna torch it. If you were going to attempt to keep the end link, this would not be ideal, but since we're replacing the end links, good riddance. Couldn't care less if I damage it. I just wanna get it off as easily as possible. Heat always, or almost always, does the trick. I would much rather do this than have to get out the cutoff wheel or sawzall. Caution, hot. Another tip for doing these end links and to make it a lot easier for you, when doing a sway bar end link, whichever sway bar you're working on, say we're on the front right now, you want the whole front of the car off the ground. You don't want one corner on the ground and the other off. You're gonna be putting force on the sway bar if the car is not flat. If one corner is on the ground and the other isn't, you're gonna be putting torque on the sway bar, making it a lot harder to manipulate the end links. This one should be a bit easier to do. You just need a 19mm. Now we should be able to get this end link out. Look at that.
TechnoToyTuning, obviously adjustable and much beefier than this guy, and also more easy to service. You don't have to deal with this seizing and ruining your day. Much simpler design, just a bolt and a nut. It's not going to cause nearly as much headache as this later down the road. Much easier to service and very easy to adjust your sway bar and add preload or change the height of the sway bar if you need to. And they machine this spacer to, pretty much perfectly replicate this here. So this is how it will go on the bottom. This will go through that lower control arm, and then this spacer, just like on the rear, is going to go in between the sway bar and the end link itself. So let's put it on. Pretty straightforward. We'll get the nut on the back side here. Get this up here. Don't forget the spacer. That spacer keeps the end link nice and straight up and down, so there's no inappropriate angle going on. And I'm adding my own washer and then the provided nut. Beautiful. We'll go ahead and tighten down these jam nuts. This end link does not need to be adjusted. Cool. Well, I'm a bit bummed. This video is coming to an end quicker than I was hoping, but not quicker than I was expecting. When I got to the tie rods, I had a feeling they weren't going to work with this car, because if you remember when I did the 1UZ swap and when I put the headers in, I moved the steering rack 1.25 inches towards the driver's side of the car. So I had to severely shorten the driver's side outer tie rod, and then for the passenger side outer tie rod, I had to get a much longer GS400 tie rod. And the TechnoToyTuning tie rods that were provided, they were both just barely too long and just barely too short to work. So if you relocate your rack like I did with this engine swap, those tie rods probably aren't going to work, unfortunately, but for the 99.999% of you, the tie rod should work just fine, because most of you have not relocated the rack like I did in this car. Now that this thing has an alignment appointment tomorrow, it should be a lot easier to get the alignment dialed into where we want it, because now that you don't have those cam bolts, you have the adjustable arms, which are just easier to adjust, and they're much more precise, and they're gonna hold the alignment much better over time. Really looking forward to that. So looking forward to getting this thing aligned and taking it out for autocross. If you are interested in these control arms or anything else that TechnoToyTuning offers for the IS300, the Mark III Supra, or even the AE86, we've done a bunch of AE86 stuff on this channel as well for TechnoToyTuning. So I'll have a link to their website in the description down below. But of course, you can also check them out on Instagram and Facebook and all that good stuff. So definitely check out TechnoToyTuning if you haven't. And hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope maybe you learned something, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.